Yeah, hello everybody. My name is Theo Dingermann. I'm hosting this session today. I think we're going to wait another couple of minutes or so and then we'll start. Okay, welcome everybody to the seminar series Digital Transformation in Pharma, jointly organized by the House of Pharma and Healthcare and by the Goethe Business School. Unlike the successful first event last year, we cannot meet this year due to the pandemic, as everybody knows. But that's no reason, of course, to interrupt or even cancel the series. Over the next 4 days, we will hear 4 exciting presentations that everyone can look forward to. I'm sure that not only participants of the current MBA programs have dialed in, I'm sure that as last year, alumni and friends of the Goethe University and Goethe Business School will also be attending, and I would like to extend a warm welcome to all of them as well. But let me now come to Hanno Härtlein and Jascha Adams, as speakers of today's first event. Both represent the Alcedis company in Gießen, and they will speak about digitalization of clinical research, platform technologies for data capture, and the use of artificial intelligence for data processing in clinical studies. Before I hand over to our speakers, I would like to mention that you can ask questions during the talks. Just write them in the F&A or Q&A section, and after the talks we will then discuss these points you are raising. So with that, I would like to hand over to our speakers, Hanno Härtlein and Jascha Adams.
Hello everyone and welcome, and thank you for having us here today. Thank you for putting us into a row of really interesting talks we can hear this week at the Summer Summit at the House of Pharma. My name is Hanno Härtlein. I'm CEO of Alcedis. Me and my colleagues are working in clinical research. We mainly do cancer drug development. We also work in some other indications. We are, I would say, at least mostly a bunch of very techie people. So we try to bring as much technology and also digitalization into clinical research as possible. And therefore, I'm really happy that we can actually speak about digitalization today. And you all agree it's a very, very broad field. And paying respect to the next 30 minutes and the lunch break session we have today, we will keep on focusing on two topics. We will speak about platforms, the vision behind platforms, the opportunities platforms are giving to us already today. And of course, we should also look at how do we handle and process all that data that we collect in clinical trials. And therefore, I'm really happy that I'm accompanied today by my colleague, Jascha Adams, who is a mathematician. He works in our biometrics department. He is also participating in the Alcedis Innovation Labs, a group of people, co-worker, but also with external collaboration, a group of people that finds very hands-on and practical approaches of how we can use artificial intelligence in clinical research. I will start with speaking about platforms, and I will actually start with picking out probably the biggest buzzword of our times out of our title. It is digitalization. And to start with a very simple explanation, what is digitizing? It means putting analog informations into ones and zeros and making it processable for computers. Digitalization or digital transformation, of course, means a lot more. It means bringing complete business processes and workflows into digital formats using digital tools. For us in clinical research, that has one huge advantage and benefit. We're having informations, we're having data digitally available. And what we can see is that over the last years, the data volume itself, the number of available data endpoints, and also the number of data sources has increased tremendously, especially over the last years. Looking back into the late 90s with the .com and the internet boom, this is when it somewhat started with web-based digital data capture. It actually was quite adventurous. We brought laptops or computers to medical sites, to hospitals, medical practitioners, along with these old-fashioned 56K modems you probably remember by the scratchy and funny sound they make when they initialize or being plugged into the telephone socket. A lot has happened since that. I think most of it really happened recently, and at least part of it also goes along with a change of mindset we can see in the pharmaceutical or in the healthcare industry. We speak a lot about patient centricity or focusing more on patients and patients' needs. And of course, we've always been doing that. The purpose of clinical research is identifying or finding new treatment options, new therapies, making them available for patients. So we always focused on patients, but now we really start integrating them into clinical research and clinical studies. Patients are obviously the origin of data, but now we start capturing at the primary data source. And we say that we capture data at the point of experience at the patient. Patients do use wearables, smartphone, mobile technologies. I will speak about that a little later on one of the next slides. We also start integrating systems into clinical studies and clinical trials. And we'll give you examples for that. And also the huge world of services or stakeholders that are working on clinical research. All of that needs to be integrated, all that generates data and all that needs to be integrated into clinical research. So the challenge is multi-data source integration into clinical studies. And how do we do it? Obviously, we're speaking about platform technologies. This is at least one answer how it can be done. Shared platforms do have a vision. We're using what is already there. We don't start with redundant data capture at different points. We are really trying to bring things together. We try to have a platform where the scientific community and all the stakeholders in clinical research can bring data together and connect. And that's the great vision of platforms, and we see more and more of that really comes to life and happens. To start, I would give you an overview with this graphic we're going through on the next slides. We're not going too much into technical details, but to start with platforms, platforms come along with a couple of core components and functionalities they deliver. In our case, we work with a microservice-based framework architecture. That means we have hundreds of functionalities. They are all packed up in little services or service packages and can be addressed, for example, from an application from the outside that interacts with our platform. Some examples are the way how we work with permissions, role-based access control, authentication, single sign-on processes, but also the whole field of clinical trial administration, analytics, reporting, Elasticsearch, to work with big data. And also the electronic case report form, the ECRF, is where the place where we store clinical or data in a clinical study is part of the platform, but can also be plugged in onto a platform if it comes from the outside. Since we speak about data, we need to store data, so data storage is part of it. We work with SQL databases, but also data warehouses, or even very fashionable now are data lakes, where we just bring in very unstructured data. So we have a layer of data storage underneath a platform. But where the real magic happens and what you could consider as the heart of a platform is, of course, the interface to the outside world. How do we bring all that together? We spoke about already. And we work with a RESTful API. The great thing is that almost every device, every system, wherever data gets captured and stored, there are defined interfaces. So systems can interact and exchange data. There are protocols of how they do it, very well documented. So you can actually bring things together. You have a structured and harmonized data exchange. Now, what can we do with it? We can start bringing things together. We can integrate. And I would like to give you some examples of what actually can be integrated into platforms. And I spoke a lot about data sources. I spoke about multiple data source integration. And one example or cluster or category are systems. And a good example for data source systems are big data projects. Think about the canceling project from the ASCO, or there are many, many examples of where big data actually comes together. One project we are working on is the European Melanoma Registry. It's Europe's biggest real-world evidence data warehouse for skin cancer. And actually, we are bringing together country registry data from currently 11 countries into one big data warehouse in a very structured and well-documented way. And now you can connect this data warehouse via a platform and interface technologies with, for example, an electronic case report form for clinical studies. So you have a very well-documented baseload of data, again, using what is already there and adding it up with study-specific questions you want to address. So that was one example. Another one, electronic health records. And I know we keep on talking for it already for years, and we are really waiting for the big breakthrough when actually electronic health records are coming and are being a standard to be used. And we are not there where we should be today. But in 2017, we did a retrospective feasibility study in the field of diabetes. And actually, we connected medical sites, diabetes or specialized centers, the biggest diabetes centers in Germany, at least most of them. And via interface technology, we got treatment data completely anonymized. So basically, you cannot run classical data management processes on such data. So what you see is what you get. And we brought all that data together via an interface. And actually, the interesting part was that we could really use a lot of that. Almost 60% of the data was usable. The rest, obviously, were dropouts due to missing data or implausible data that couldn't be used for analysis. But that shows there is already a lot out there that can be used. And you're probably aware of the current situation. Just this year in July, the Patient- or Patientendatenschutzgesetz has passed the German Parliament. And this actually is a roadmap for the next years of what is going to come. And it follows a statement of our Federal Minister of Health, Jens Spahn, who said that digitalization shall finally arrive at patients' daily life. And actually, it obliges insurance companies, healthcare professionals, hospitals, medical sites, it obliges them to provide the data they store and capture to their patients in a digital and in a structured format. I believe it's not quite clear what structured will be at the end, but we are really on on the way of making all that digital data available. And in that context, very interesting for clinical research. It is planned from 2023 onwards, really, that patients can contribute, maybe even donate their data to clinical research. And there are many companies that are getting fit for purpose. There are many companies that provide or work on solutions of how patients then can manage all their data, their electronic health records. So again, we will have new systems coming up that can be included into clinical studies. Now we spoke about systems, had two good examples. We should, as initially said, also focus on patients and see what can be done there. And you're probably aware that wearables, medical devices, they become really fashionable in clinical research. And we did in 2016, we had our first experiences with wearable integration. And actually we went to Canada and we had a pilot study in Canada with patients that suffered from pulmonary hypertension. And we wanted to see if there is a change of activity whilst patients are undergoing their treatment. So we equipped patients with Fitbits. Patients also got, in addition, tablets, and the Fitbits, the wearable, wired the data to the tablet, and the tablet wired it into the clinical study database. And in addition to that, we also had ePro, electronic reported outcomes. We captured them on a tablet as well, and we had a patient communication portal. Patients could communicate with their treating physicians. Especially in Canada, you can imagine, where you have long distances between patients and physicians. This is a very interesting feature to implement, and also really physicians can keep track on how their patients are doing and can interact and even work with alert systems. So patients using wearables. And initially I said patients are the origin of data, patients are the primary source, and yes, patients are really mobile. Wearables are one example for that. But there's a lot more. There are medical devices, there are apps, app technologies, smartphones. So whatever patients can wear or use or carry as mobile technologies can be more or less integrated. So biosensory data, heart rate, temperature, blood pressure, sleep behavior. There's a lot. We always have to see if it's still a lifestyle wearable, or do we enter the world of medical devices. So do we have an intended use, for example, for diagnostics or for treatment, even treatment support. Good examples for medical devices are permanent glucose monitoring at diabetes patients or COPD inhaler management. Then I mentioned already the world of apps. You see how many healthcare apps you can find already on the market. Of course, only a few are really usable in a setting of clinical research, but there are apps for therapy management, patient diaries. As I said, communication portals between patients and physicians. And speaking about apps and smartphones, also think about the potential of cameras. Every smartphone, at least the newer generations, they have bionic chips, and smartphone cameras can actually support diagnostics. They can start with a skin rush, but can even end up with diagnosing severe diseases such as skin cancer. We spoke about systems and patients as a data source, and now we should also end up with services. Of course, services sounds a little unspectacular, but again, we have many stakeholders working in a clinical trial, and they all have their own IT infrastructure. And again, we can connect, thinking about laboratories that are running analysis, thinking about pharmacies that do all the drug accountability, sample tracking, sample shipment. All that can be visualized and integrated into a clinical research portal or into a platform. And on top of that, of course, services like image processing, AI-based analytics. And we're just starting a study that goes in the direction cancer screening, and we are actually using a service provider that has a certified or a medical device that uses artificial intelligence for diagnostics in CT scans. So that's another good example of how you can integrate the very colorful world that is out there via a platform into your clinical research. And having mentioned AI and analytics, I believe it's a good point in time now to hand over to Jascha. So thank you very much at this stage, and see you later in the Q&A session.
Well, thank you, and hello from my side. My name is Jascha, and I work as a mathematician or statistician for Alcedis. And in the next few minutes, I will introduce you to the field of artificial intelligence from a different perspective, as I'll guide you through the journey of AI development here at Alcedis. The process we started actually a while ago and we're still undergoing it currently. So hopefully this will give you an insight of how to approach AI development in general and how to optimize its benefits. But first things first, what is AI? So unfortunately, the answer to that question is not as straightforward as the question itself. But loosely speaking, we're talking about AI whenever a device or an algorithm perceives its environment to make decisions and take actions that maximize its chance of successfully achieving goals, such as recognition, planning, and or learning, just to name a few. So when it comes to actual development of an AI, the first thing to do is to define what do you want the final software to be capable of. And in our case, we were interested in adverse events. So we wanted a software which takes into account all of an individual's data, which has been documented within a study, and then evaluating it regarding the completeness of AI-related related information and the risk that this individual will be diagnosed with some specific disease or adverse event in the future. But this should not just be done by a given set of rules, of course. Instead, we wanted the algorithm to identify these rules itself, and of course, the software should run in real time, in a sense that a patient's profile gets re-evaluated whenever new information is added to it. And on top of that, we also wanted it to learn from the incoming information during the documentation process. So putting it all together, our requirements or our goal was a self-expanding software for complex pattern recognition and evaluation. So the next step is to check for feasibility. For what we wanted, this was actually the easy part, at least in theory. Evaluation is the easiest, as this is just a set of rules to implement. So check on that. And next, the identification of these rules. This is possible with machine learning algorithms. And fortunately, a wide band of such algorithms already exists. But of course, you have to adjust them to your needs, so customize them. And the real-time aspect is basically just the coordination of the updating process and a question of used hardware. So now the only thing which is left is the continuous expansion and the self-learning aspect of the training database. And it's also covered by several of the available algorithms, as well as the implementation, the coordination of the updating process, and again, the hardware. So easy, right? Now we just adjust the algorithm, let it train itself based on our data, and implement it, and we're good to go. Well, this is actually the most time-consuming part. So it requires an extremely good understanding of your data. And you have to sort out what data is relevant or for the training of the AI in the first place. Maybe you would even like to set up multiple testing sets for several AIs with different strength. In case of character variables, there's a good chance that you actually need to weigh them, as most of these algorithms usually perform way better with numerical data as it is scalable. And when you have fields from, let's say, an eCRF where free text has been entered, you might even need to extract relevant information from these free texts beforehand, or add another component to your AI where these texts are searched for specific terms such as medications or concomitant diseases and so on to actually being able to process this information. And this is also the part we are currently working on. Experimenting with different algorithms and training data sets while using input from medical experts as well as data managers and statisticians. Using first-hand experience in the field of clinical trials is the most crucial thing. And without all these adjustments to your AI, it might later work in the sense that it can technically do what you want it to do, such as identifying connections in huge data pools, for example. But most likely the output is not making much sense in a medical way. So to illustrate how all the work I just described pays off, I would like to tell you about an example we used among others to validate if the algorithm we put together works well so far. So we looked at anonymized test data from several thousand patients treated for cancer, and the treatment consisted of chemotherapy for different durations. And for all these patients, adverse events which occurred during the treatment have been documented. So, for example, given as a patient with the following AEs, which is A, B, C, and D. So our algorithm already derives rules automatically, such as the rule E has been derived from the combination of A, B, C. And then it checks for these rules to be applied to the patient. So here the patient is identified with an increased risk of the adverse event E as the completion of the profile A, B, and C. Considering all these patients' data, our algorithm further identified several patients for which a specific adverse event should have been documented, but was not. And this is the second part you see here. So thanks to the high customization of the algorithm, rules such as D derived from A, B, C, and F have been identified. And additionally, all the rules which derive D from the profile A, B, and C have a lower confidence. So they're just, there's a lower probability for them to happen. And in this case, then the adverse event F is identified as a potential forgotten adverse event for this patient, as he fulfills A, B, and C, already developed D, but has not does not have the adverse event F in his profile yet. And in our actual data, this adverse event, which is here represented by the letter F, was hair loss. And obviously, this is connected to the chemotherapy treatment, and the obviousness of this connection is actually the reason why it was not documented by doctors or nurses in the first place. And we know this from experience. So, however, this straightforward example validated our so far algorithm, as it only identified the adverse event hair loss as a missing information for patients with an already longer treatment duration. And the reason why I'm giving you this example of validation and telling you so vehemently about the necessary influence of expertise is that I want you to remember one thing when it comes to AI in healthcare or clinical trials. At the current state of technology, such algorithms always will and have to be highly customized solutions. At least in the near future, AI will not replace doctors or people working with healthcare data in general. But the whole industry is undergoing a change to become more and more supported by AIs. And this simply allows us to process more data faster, more efficient, and way more reliable. And this is exactly where we are heading as well. So for now, we are looking forward to mainly support our data management with our AI, pointing out data entries where some information might have been missed out on, as well as entries which indicate a high probability to result in further documentation, such as diseases or adverse events. And all in all, this will lead to more reliable data management. This will result in higher data completion, resulting in more precise analysis, leaving less uncertainties about the results. So supporting the very core of clinical studies with a well-customized AI, it can optimize the whole process, allowing its benefits to even reach the patient himself. And on a last note, of course, AI can be combined with other components to further increase the resulting reliability of the data or for optimization in general. For example, multiple imputation. These are more or less complex models to fill out missing parts of your data based on what you were able to collect. And combining both approaches could lead to forecasting of studies' outcome, and this already from an early stage on, which then grows more certain over time. So you can somehow measure and visualize how well study is going in regard of its endpoints, for example. And in case a study is not meeting the requirements, for example, when it comes to patient recruitment or documentation in general, this can also be detected, and a decision to abort the study can be based on its current state as well as its forecast, saving significant amount of resources. And with that, I would already like to end our presentation and thank you very much for your attention. And now we're looking forward to answer your questions for the following Q&A session. And for that, we will be back just in a moment in a little more comfortable space.
Okay, thank you very much for this very nice presentation. It's very complicated for a person, you know, who used to be a molecular biologist and you know, went out of business, out of science a few years ago already. So progress is really moving fast, but on the other hand, it's also moving slow, I would say. I mean, we read a lot about these technologies, these platforms, about AI and stuff like that. And if you hear talk like yours today, we see that we are still at the very beginning, and there are many problems to be solved in order to really implement all these technologies and concepts into clinical practice. But I'm pretty sure that this will change rapidly, and one has to keep up, and therefore talks like this are so important. So once again, thank you very much. As I said, you know, I'm really not an expert, really not, and I hope I can manage the questions, you know, with some variations I even don't understand, but I try to read the questions to you and also to the people who are joining us in the Zoom meeting, and then we can discuss those. And I like to start with a question from David Love, and he writes, are your platforms cloud native? Do you have, do they allow scale out and multi-tenancy? What are your thoughts on data and services moving to the cloud, and how is this trend reflected in the life sciences?
Okay, that's probably a question for me. Is it okay with the microphone now?
It's fine. Yeah,
okay,
yeah, it's
great.
fine.
So yeah, sorry for, I read in the chat we had a missing audio at the beginning. Maybe just to repeat, basically the first seconds I think you missed, I was just saying, thank you for having us here today. Thank you for putting us in a row of these talks in the House of Pharma. Okay, in regards to the question, yes, there are cloud-based solutions. The servers where data gets stored for our applications are, but are still located in Germany. We have our own computing center in-house. In regards to multi-tenancy, of course, you can multi-clients, or let's say our clients all use the same software, the same platform, the same services, but of course they are separated from each other, which I hope answers the question. And I think the last part of the question probably, if I remember, was about data, probably health data going through clouds or going through the internet today. And I believe that might be a question that goes towards data privacy and data protection and where data gets stored. And of course, that's in clinical research an important thing. Of course, we can bring together data from various points. Yet, if it's a clinical research project, a clinical trial, clinical study, of course, we have a clinical study database already for archiving purposes at the end, where all the data that was relevant for a clinical trial gets stored. But in terms of data privacy and data protection, of course, patients do need to know where their data is going to. And I think that's also always a big issue if we speak about multi-data sourcing. I brought some examples of how data can be transferred, for example, from big data projects into clinical studies. And it's always a question of how you set up patients' informations, what patients consent for, do they know what their data is used for, where is it going to be stored, and who has access to it, or what is going to happen with that data. And we made the experience that many clinical projects are actually are lacking later at the end, because at the very beginning, when we discuss with ethic committees about the study purpose and how we inform patients, very often studies do miss that part, or we forget to really clarify on what can be done with that data at the end. So, yeah, I hope that was answering the second part of the question.
Yeah, let me add a question to the last part, because I think that's fairly critical. Informed consent, is that a problem still? I mean, we are still in an early phase, so the patients have to consent, and that means they have to inform consent, so they have to know what they have to consent to. So is it difficult to communicate what's going on there with their data and what they should agree upon? Or do you see dropouts which might really interfere with the clinical study? I mean, sometimes the physicians, the sponsors of a clinical study, they are happy if they can fill the clinical study. So if you have dropouts because of this data problem, that is probably, that could be a problem, I could imagine.
No, actually, I wouldn't say that we experience a lot of dropouts from patients that are, if a patient is, patients do have more questions actually on the treatment they receive within a clinical study and on their disease treatment and the study purpose itself than on data privacy usually. But yeah, as I said, I mean, if patients do get all the information, what is going to happen with their data and also for what purposes that data is used, that works out very well. And again, if you bring patients into a setting, also I brought examples of how we integrate patients via wearable technology or equipping them with additional devices for additional data capture. I think as soon as patients, obviously they want to understand and they need to understand how a study is designed and what the purpose of a study is, but then the experience is that patients are very willing also to participate in that form of, let's call them innovative study setups and study designs. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So next question comes from Janos Tsikos, and he asks, do you see the interoperability issue as the major roadblock in today's medical platform business?
Sorry, I'm not sure if I understood the question. Is it?
Can you read it, or shall I repeat it?
Yeah, actually, I can. Sorry, I try and.
see interoperability issue as the major roadblock in today's medical platform business?
I have to admit, I'm not quite. I'm not sure if I'm getting the question right, or if it's about connecting various platforms or connecting systems or making them operable. If that's the question, or if the issue is meant by how connecting various platforms or technologies, then definitely this is a big challenge, connecting IT infrastructure from different stakeholders. But I don't see, I think technology is the smallest problem we have in that context, also in clinical research. I think technology could already today probably do a lot more, but obviously also due to the very strongly regulated field we are working in, for very good purpose, of course. It's a very sensitive area, clinical research and drug development. But I think technology-wise, we could already be further. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Another question from David Love, and I'm not sure about the abbreviations. What specific types of ML?
Machine learning.
Machine learning. Okay, I thought it would be melanoma or some machine learning. Are you using to identify hidden AEs?
Yeah. So
what is AEs?
Basically, we have several approaches.
Adverse events.
Adverse events. Okay.
Yeah,
AEs.
Adverse events. Yeah. So we have several approaches to find these hidden adverse events. At the very start, we began with simple associations rules mining based on different stocks of data we formed for different kind of studies or different kind of data. So the rules were identified, and being able to just identify rules which were medically proven or be approved from a medical side. And for now, we're actually more going into experimenting with neural networks. When it comes to the actual algorithms underlying these networks, or underlying our final AI, that's, I guess, a bit too much for this for now, because that would be just going into detail for the customization, which parameters have to be adjusted what way. So I would leave that out for now, but if there's interest, please reach out to us. But yeah, I'll close the question. For now, we're experimenting with neural networks.
Okay. And again, János Cikros, could you elaborate a bit on the exponential data explosion and the burden of computing analyzing capacity of unstructured, what is it, EHR?
Electronic health records, yeah.
Okay, electronic health record in EU, Germany. Could the trend of being data generated in the EU, delivering it to US and Canada probably? No, China's analytical capacities, missing the ability of analyzing it ourselves, be reduced by EU initiatives? It's a political question as well.
That's a very, very complex question. And as in the question reflected, yeah, we have an exponential data explosion. I think I also mentioned that on one of the first slides, and we can see that there's really a lot coming together. And I believe, of course, we need smart ways how to analyze such big data pools, for example, with innovative methods. In regards to electronic health records, as I said, we really discuss for having patient data in a structured way, store them centralized, and we are still, I believe, not there where we should be. But we can see that there comes more electronic health record data together. I mean, hospitals store patient data, medical practices. The question is, how do we bring it together centrally at one point? And so yes, that type of data will become more and more, and in a couple of years we will really see a lot of data coming from electronic health records. The question is, how do we process this, and do we do it here? And I think the question was about EU initiatives and bringing that type of data to the US or China. I'm not so familiar with what is happening in China, but definitely in the US we can see huge tech companies getting really fit for health data processing. Obviously, I mean, the biggest companies are who provide that type of services are located in the US. But yeah, definitely we should be able in Europe to process also our own data. Speaking in terms of data protection laws that are different in the US, definitely living up the idea of shared informations, I would say I would rather consider that maybe as a global approach, and it should be at one point maybe possible to bring together electronic health data from multiple countries and have kind of a shared pool of informations available for multiple countries. Yeah.
There's one more question from Janos, and he
as Janos is very
active, yeah.
very active. I'm also please feel free also to contact me and Jascha after the talk. Get in touch.
Yeah,
We can,
I think he clarifies a few points of the question he asked before, but probably that would be the best thing would be, because it's really technical. So he understands obviously a lot here, and probably it would be good if Janos, if you could give a call to the two speakers today and really get your questions answered.
So Janos, please feel free, give us a call later.
Then I have a question of Christian Grunwitz. If this is Christian Grunwitz I know, I would say hello to him. It's one of my former students. Besides detection of hidden adverse events, do you leverage what was ML again? Machine learning for day-to-day management activities, for example, data validation and querying processes?
Yeah, very good question. Thanks for that. I already mentioned part of it in the presentation, because of course we are trying to optimize our data management with machine learning algorithms and procedures, and so far we are implementing them for example detection of medication terms or disease terms which were entered into free texts, where doctors or patients themselves can enter additional information, and to actually be able to evaluate this information as well. Such algorithms can then trigger a warning or a short email, which is then sent to our data managers, so they are able to have a look at it as well, and then maybe put a query for this, and yeah, process this data to just gain the maximum, or to get the best data in the very end for the final analysis. Yes.
Mm-hmm. A question from Marcus Krupp. Thank you for the presentation. He states at the beginning, I'm curious to hear about, more about first the specificity and sensitivity of your model with respect to predict true positive hidden adverse events versus false positive hidden adverse events. Second, have you adapted your models to other data sets beyond melanomas, for example, lymphoma or cancer arising to other organs? If yes, what are there, was there significant change with respect to predict hidden adverse events? And third, Have you tested your model with data taking into consideration post-marketed data? If yes, what was the performance to predict hidden adverse events?
Well, that's a lot.
Yeah.
For the first point, just let me check quickly.
Specificity.
Yeah, the specificity and sensitivity.
Yeah.
We did some calculations on that, and it turns out that actually the specificity as well as the sensitivity, so true and false truly and falsely detected adverse events, turned out to be, for us at least, very delightful, because there were just very few cases of falsely identified hidden adverse events, and most of the adverse events which have not been pointed out to query again or to have a look at it again were not important to do so with. But of course there are some few cases, but this is actually we're talking about negligible numbers here. So of course we're trying to optimize the algorithms further and optimize the number of AEs we're detecting. But one of few cases there will always be that you'll not be able to find. The